What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 8 of House of the Dragon, an episode called The Lord of the Tides, written by Ellen Shim and directed by Greta Vasant Patel. If you have not yet seen the episode, nor seen the teaser for next week's episode, this is not the video for you because I consider all that to be fair game in this discussion. But I'll start in a more general fashion by complimenting the writing staff of this show by continuing to add new material to the book, which I think more often than not matches what I love from the source material. And that is very challenging to do. This episode had only one or two little details that came actually from the text, and yet I was riveted more or less from start to finish. And it does such a good job of basically getting us emotionally invested in and politically invested in so many different opposing points of view, where you're rooting for these people and you hate to see them come to blows, but you know it's inevitable because Vaemon Velaryon, who's been kind of, playing second fiddle to his brother, the Sea Snake, all season, has a really justifiable case that he is making before the Iron Throne, where he feels like a bastard is about to rob his family of their inheritance, basically bring his line to an end. And so I can totally see things from his point of view. But also, put yourself in the shoes of Jason Luke. Like, they didn't ask to be born bastards. They didn't ask to have, Breakbones be their father. So they want to get their inheritance. But everybody just wants to get what they think is coming to them. And I feel like if you were to describe this show in a few words, it would just be, maybe, I was about to say enlightened self-interest, but maybe not so enlightened. Maybe just self-interest should be like the subtitle for this show, because everybody's just fighting for what's theirs. And perhaps the only major contribution to the show that doesn't come from the book that I don't really like is how they continue to try and make this struggle about setting the realm in order so that they'll be in a position to play their part in the Song of Ice and Fire. And that's all been invented for the show in order to link it back to Game of Thrones. And I get why they would do so, just to make the two shows feel like they're part of the same continuity. But honestly, I don't need any characters feeling like they're fighting for the good of the realm 180 years in the future. I much prefer people just fighting for what's theirs. I mean, look at Aemon's face. Look him in the eye. I mean, Aemon looks just so badass now with that patch. Do you honestly think that guy gives a fuck about anything other than just kicking ass and taking names? Or look at his older brother, Aegon the Elder. I mean, at any rate, all these kids, they are about to just unleash hell on each other. And to add further complication or confusion to the already very, very rich brew, they introduced a few more characters this show, which I'm sure which I'm sure will cause no end of confusion, because Rhaenyra and Daemon have had more kids, one of whom they named Aegon. And of course, there's already the Aegon that is the child of Alicent and Viserys. And so in the book, they differentiate the two by calling one Aegon the Elder and the other Aegon the Younger. They haven't gone so far as to say that yet in the show, but it gets complicated when everybody, or not everybody, most people have bleach blonde hair and a lot of names that sound very similar. I mean, Aegon the Younger's younger brother is Viserys, like his grandfather. Yeah, the family tree is getting to be a complete and total mess, and I just love it. Also, quick side note, the dragon name Caraxes was trending on Twitter all weekend long, and people were talking about Daemon and his dragon, the Bloodworm, and some of the major events that his character will be experiencing in the seasons to come. And so if you're worried about spoilers at all when it comes to House of the Dragon, my advice would be just go ahead and read Fire and Blood, because it seems inevitable that people are going to accidentally or deliberately lay it all out there in the very near future. So stay off social media if you don't want spoilers. And while this season's not yet over, we have 2 more episodes to go, I don't think it's too early to declare that this is one of the most satisfying entertainment experiences to be had in 2022 on either the big or small screen, at a time where most shows and most movies not only disappoint, but disappoint me bitterly, as is the case with Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. It's just a relief every single Sunday night to plan my entire calendar around a show that continues to deliver week after week after week. And so let's just enjoy it while it lasts. So with this episode, we have yet another time jump of roughly 6 years. And I believe the time jumps are going to come to an end moving forward, at least if the show follows the events of the book, given what happens at the end of this episode and what's teased in the next, we're basically going to see the rest of the show covering the struggle known as the Dance of the Dragons, which lasted from the year 129 AC to the year 131 or 132. In any event, there should be no more cause for major time jumps for the rest of the show's duration. So get used to seeing the faces of the characters as we know them. But the big drama of this episode is that the sea snake has been injured fighting down in the stepstones. He got hacked across the throat. He fell overboard. His wound is infected, and whether or not he'll survive is up in the air. And so there's a big debate within the Velaryon family over who is going to inherit the Driftwood throne. And we saw how in the previous episode, the sea snake was talking to Lucerys as if he is his true-born grandson and will inherit the throne, so on and so forth. But as we quickly come to realize, Vaemon wants that throne for himself, and Rhaenys, she seems pretty comfortable on that throne as well. Long story short, they decide they're going to go to King's Landing and petition their various claims and basically get a ruling from the Iron Throne as to what they should do moving forward. And smart, clever girl that she is, Baela sends a message to Daemon telling him that Lucerys' legitimacy is about to be called into question, and if Lucerys' legitimacy is called into question, therefore Jace's will as well. But before he receives the message, there was this great little scene, which I absolutely loved and adored, where we see Daemon exploring the island of Dragonstone and basically like doing some pretty intense mountain climbing. Basically, there's this long crack as he's going in and looking for this clutch of eggs. And we've never seen a clutch of eggs like in its native form, as he's basically, it almost looks like he's digging the eggs out of like a pile of like dragon droppings. But it was just so cool that they decided to slow the show down and give us what I think is the best shot of the season so far of Daemon climbing, but also just giving us a little more information about what the eggs are like when they're initially laid by a dragon. Obviously, when it comes to this world, people really respond to the family dynamics and the political dynamics, but it's also great fantasy. I mean, for fantasy lovers, this is the gold standard as far as I'm concerned, and so it's just great to get a little detail, a little reminder. This is a fantasy show, and as far as fantasy goes, it's about as good as it gets. So back in King's Landing, we see that Alicent has her hands more than full looking after Viserys as his health completely, totally fails. I mean, he is at death's door. He's covered in bandages. He's using milk of the poppy to kill the pain. But we see how her son, Aegon, continues to be a complete and total piece of shit who essentially raped a serving girl by the name of Diana as she came to bring him some wine. And meanwhile, like his wife's like in the next room, but Aegon is pure slime and his mom knows it, and she gives him a nice slap in the face to wake him up. I thought that scene was absolutely hysterical, that as far as she's concerned, he is the heir to the throne, but she still smacks him around like he's a little boy. And of course, tensions continue to rise with the arrival of Rhaenyra and Daemon in King's Landing, especially when they notice how much King's Landing has been redecorated, where a lot of their kind of family heirlooms have been replaced with religious symbols. And obviously Rhaenyra and Daemon are a little alarmed by that, but the High Towers are much more spiritual and devout on that front. And there's a great little bit when they're visiting with Viserys where Daemon smells the cup that's at Viserys' side, and he's obviously very suspicious about how his brother's being kept in this drug-addled state where he can't even keep up with the conversation, and which leads to this one of the best emotional payoffs of the season, where Viserys decides to go without his painkillers for the day so that he can sit on the Iron Throne, make his own rulings, and also host this dinner or this supper between both sides of the family. And I felt like those were some of the most satisfying emotional beats that we've seen all season long, where Viserys finally got to be king one last time before the inevitable occurs. And while this episode placed heavy emphasis on politics and family drama, there was a little bit of action. There was a great scene in the yard where Jace and Luke are kind of reminiscing about growing up at King's Landing, and they watch a little sparring session between Aemond and Criston Cole, where Criston Cole loses, and we see how Aemond is a warrior born and very much resembles his close relative Daemon. And it's funny how it's very easy to get Daemon's name and Aemon's name mixed up or confused. Whenever I'm discussing them with like fellow fans of the show, I find myself accidentally confusing the two of them all the time, but they're both total badasses. They look fucking lethal. And the fact that Aemond is able to take Cole in combat tells you all you need to know about his combat skills. And I love how he looks over at his nephews and says, "Nephews, are you training today?" I mean, he is hell on wheels, and I can't wait to watch him in action in future episodes. And so prior to this big petition scene, we see everybody kind of plotting and scheming and trying to gain some advantage. Rhaenyra makes an excellent proposal to Rhaenys that Rhaenyra's sons, Jace and Luke, should marry the granddaughters of Rhaenys, while at the same time, we see Vaemond sitting down with Alicent and Otto, promising that he will be loyal to them and that his fleet will be in their hands if they take his side. And it looks like he's going to get his way. However, on the day of the big petition, Viserys shows up, with his cane, wearing a mask covering half of his face, and he's just limping in, and he says, "I will sit the throne today." And it's just an incredible scene, seeing how he quite literally is at death's door. I mean, he looks like the undead almost, but he's determined to try and make things right as well as he can prior to his death. And Viserys has this great kingly moment where he says that the matter of succession is settled, but that he wants to hear from Rhaenys about what the Sea Snake's wishes may have been in the event of his untimely demise. And Rhaenys says that he always intended for Luke to inherit the Driftwood throne, and that she plans on following through with Rhaenyra's proposal of marrying Jace and Luke to Baela and Rhaena, and she's totally on board. And this is when the episode got really juicy, because Vaemond is pissed beyond words, and justifiably so. I mean, if you look at the entire drama from his point of view, basically that he and any of his future children or grandchildren are basically being disinherited. So he screams at Jace and Luke, calls them bastards, and then calls Rhaenyra a whore. And if you remember in the previous episode, Viserys said that if anybody ever called into question Jace and Luke's parentage ever again, he'd have their tongue removed. But as Viserys is reaching for his blade, Daemon steps in and just slashes right through Vaemond's head. He doesn't quite behead him. He kind of goes through the jawline just above the tongue, and it says he can keep his tongue. I mean, holy shit. For an episode that was light on action, it definitely was not unafraid to bring just gruesome, horrific violence. But it was a great classic Daemon moment and a small taste of things to come in this inevitable struggle. And I love how during this scene, as well as in the supper scene, everybody's constantly watching each other and staring at each other. It's just people are just staring daggers. There's so many just bloodthirsty bastards in this family. And if you watched in the petition scene, Aemond is always watching Daemon, and you can always tell that, you can almost suspect that when he sees Daemon cutting down Vaemond, that Daemon is absolutely speaking his language. But I'm just realizing now, there's no way I've gotten through this video without getting Daemon, Aemond, and Vaemond's names confused or mixed up. If I've gotten those names jumbled at any point, I do apologize, but they all sound pretty goddamn similar. So finally we get the big, tense family dinner between the Greens and the Blacks. And as it started, I was just thinking to myself, please nobody serve alcohol, because some of these people cannot be expected to behave properly. And we see that Aegon is just talking all kinds of shit to Jace about his upcoming marriage and about how the dirty deed is done and so on and so forth. But then we get an absolutely magical scene where Viserys is talking about the pain that he feels over the chasm that has grown between those he loves most. And he pulls off his mask. We see that his eye is gone, that there's this giant hole in his face. I mean, he is rotting before their eyes. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I think the greatest contribution to this show that doesn't come from Fire and Blood is the interpretation of the character of Viserys. Because in the book, he's just a kind of a big, jolly, overweight guy who has shortness of breath and chest pain, who eventually just kind of croaks. But they've made the figure so much more grand and tragic. And so it just shows how you don't have to be slavishly devoted to the source material to give great drama. But if you're going to make a change, do it with a sense of purpose and bring your fucking A game. And in the case of Viserys, the show absolutely has. And then for a very brief shining moment, we get a scene of genuine reconciliation where Rhaenyra makes a toast to the devotion of Alicent and talking about how no one's been more attentive to Viserys and that she is grateful. That Alicent returns the gesture and says that Rhaenyra will make a fine queen. So enjoy these moments while they last, because they won't come often in the seasons to come. And then things start to get a little more tense when Aegon the Elder offers to instruct Jace and his betrothed on the act of love. But Jace refuses to take the bait. He makes his own toast to Aegon and Aemond. And we get a little music, and we get a little dancing, and Viserys is carried away. And then we get one of the few details of this episode that comes directly from the book, where Aemond, who looks just fucking lethal, and he's always so poised and so in control. Like, his brother's obviously just kind of a drunken, sex-crazed maniac, but Aemond just seems to have like an almost military bearing about him. And he makes this toast, and he keeps talking about how strong his nephews are, and just keeps placing huge emphasis on that. And obviously, anybody who's following the family drama and the parentage of these boys, their father was Breakbones from House Strong, but on the surface, his words appear to be totally sincere. It's like, oh, no, I'm giving them a compliment. I'm calling them strong. But we get a brief little scrap between Jace and Luke and Aegon and Aemond. And once again, I was just reminded of just how similar Aemond and Daemon are to one another. It's eerie. They're almost like they were like grown in a bottle. They're so much alike. But Rhaenyra and Alicent seem to have a sincere reconciliation, and Rhaenyra promises to fly back to King's Landing for more bonding sessions as soon as she gets her sons safely home. And then we finally get Viserys' death scene, where he's rambling to Alicent about A Song of Ice and Fire, talking about Aegon and the prince that was promised. And as we see in the teaser for next week's episode, she interprets this as Viserys naming Aegon the Elder as the heir to the throne, which is obviously going to lead to a lot of bloodshed and murder and mayhem. And from what I saw in the teaser, it looks like they are absolutely following down to the letter this little secret council of the Greens that takes place right after Viserys' death. So I can't fucking wait. And the next 7 days are going to be absolute torture, waiting to see how they will handle that really juicy chapter. And it's funny how for the last couple of weeks, the TV landscape has been totally, not dominated, but obviously heavily informed by this rivalry between HBO Max and Amazon, and the rivalry between the two fantasy shows, and how do you measure the ratings, and so on and so forth. But in the end, all that truly matters is the end product, the creativity. What's the more satisfying story? And House of the Dragon at this point is just destroying Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, just abusing it. It's almost embarrassing at this point by what a large margin they have been victorious in this battle between the two franchises. But I will miss this fall, or I will miss this period, like the battle of the shows, the battle of the fantasy shows, because this Thursday is the end of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. We only have 2 more episodes of House of the Dragon. So yeah, this period, if you're a fantasy fan, you're eating very well right now, so soak it up and enjoy it while it lasts. But before I go, I have to ask you a very important question. Does your happy trail look more like a happy highway? Does your bush peek out over your fence? If you had to even think about the answer, you need the revolutionary products from Manscaped. They're the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. If you've not yet heard my podcast, Wrong Reel, please go check it out. But getting back to Manscaped, success is when preparation meets opportunity, and Manscaped's Platinum Package will make sure you're prepared when opportunity strikes. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code WRONGREEL. That is Wrong Reel in all caps. Once again, you'll get 20% off and free shipping. And go ahead and get the Platinum Package, because the gold standard is no longer good enough. The Manscaped Platinum Package 4.0 is the one-stop shop for the man who deserves it all. They designed this package to allow you to fully align your entire hygiene routine with elite products. Inside this Platinum Package, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Ultra Premium Body Wash, Ultra Premium 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner, Ultra Premium Deodorant, Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant, Crop Reviver Ball Spray Toner, Anti-Chafing Boxers, which I'm wearing right now as we speak, and the Shed Travel Bag to hold your goods while traveling. So that's all I've got for you for now. Hope you enjoyed this reaction and review. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. But I hope everyone has an amazing week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.